Hello, this is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of the Christ School of Theology. You're listening to a series of lectures right now on Duns Scotus. This is the second lecture. They're very short lectures, about 10 minutes apiece. And hopefully if you look at all 6 of these, you'll know more about Scotus than you did before you watched them. Okay, so last time I talked a little bit about Scotus's life, a little bit about his works. Here in this lecture, I want to talk a bit about his influence, and then I want to introduce some important metaphysical innovations that he gave to us. Scotus's his work had an immediate and a significant effect on the philosophy of his time. His work did draw opposition from both the right and the left, if you will. The right being the older traditions, so the Thomists and the Dominicans did not much like some of what Scotus was about. And from the left, Occam and his followers in the Via Moderna thought that he was too conservative ontologically. We'll see a bit of this as we go forward. The Scotus school really flourished until about the 17th century, and it affected Descartes. And so if you've ever read the Meditations, as every college student, hopefully in an introductory philosophy class still does, they don't do that anymore, but they did. I can pretend like that happens, right? If you've actually read the Meditations of Descartes, and if you know something about Scotus, you see all these connections, but you don't see them if you don't. So oftentimes the professors teaching these courses know nothing about Scotus, so they don't know where Descartes is getting some of this, particularly when he's talking about perfection and when he's talking about the way that the will is for human beings. That's the one place where we are in the image of God. We have the same power of the will as God himself, so freedom of the will. Anyway, during the scholastic recovery of the 19th century, and yes, there was one, there was a return to scholasticism among many Catholics, and particularly after Vatican I, we see a strong return to scholastic theology, the theology of Thomas. But there wasn't a recovery of Scotus. There was a recovery of Thomas, so he became the official theologian of the post-Vatican Church. Now, in the 20th century, we've seen a renewed interest in Scotus, and there is now a new critical edition of his works coming out. And I think it had 11 volumes last I checked. There may be more now. Now, his metaphysics. He follows Avicenna. Now, you're going to see these names arise all the time. Averroes and Avicenna. Again, these are the Islamic philosophers. He follows Avicenna in claiming that the subject matter of metaphysics is being qua being. That sounds pretty Aristotelian. Being insofar as being is, right? For our good friend Scotus, being is common to God, substance, and accidents. They all have being. Now, Averroes, I should make that a capital. Averroes held that metaphysics concerns separate substances from God. So he tries to make a little bit more of a distinction here between God and creation. The big question is, can you talk about creation in the same categories as you can talk about the Creator? That's the big question, right? And Avicenna, and we're going to see Scotus here, claims certainly that we can talk in the same way with the same categories about creation and creature, and creation and creator. And if we couldn't do that, we would not be making any sense when we talk, okay? Metaphysics concerns for Scotus the transcendentals, one, being, good. Of course, these are all coextensive with being. Also, he talks about what is signified by a distinction disjunction coextensive with being. So we have the infinite and the finite, the necessary and the contingent, right? These categories are metaphysical categories, and they're all covered by this most general and abstract of concepts, being. Metaphysics deals for Scotus with everything capable of real existence. Now, he gives us three distinctions and then a fourth. And the fourth is the really big important one. He holds to a real distinctions. There are real distinctions, he says. There is a conceptual distinctions. There are conceptual distinctions. There is a modal distinction, if you will. And then, very importantly for Scotus, there is a formal distinction. Now you're saying a distinction in what? Well, of course, we're talking about metaphysics. So, a real distinction would hold between X and Y if and only if it is logically possible for X to exist without Y or Y to exist without X. Okay? So anything in nature, anything that is above nature that one thinks, if it is logically possible for X to exist without Y or Y to exist without X, then we have a real distinction between X and Y. A conceptual distinction holds between X and Y if and only if the distinction is in mente, right, in thought. And this distinction does not affect the thing itself. Okay? So there's one thing there. We can classify or think about it in two different ways. So we make a conceptual distinction, but this is a distinction made by the mind onto the thing. And so it doesn't track metaphysically with the thing. Obviously, a real distinction would be tracking metaphysically with the thing, actually the things. He talks of a modal distinction as individuating the intensity of a quality had by a substance. So this deals with a thing's intrinsic mode. And this is a little harder to see, and I'm not going to go into this one because I want to get right to the next one. And that is the formal distinction. Now, the formal distinction is supposed to lie between the real and the conceptual distinction. This distinction is mind independent. It's grounded in something in the thing, but it does not entail a real separability in the thing. An example here would be will and intellect. They are inseparable. Can't have will without intellect and intellect without will, according to Scotus. But they are formally distinct. Okay? Now you're saying, well, give us a clearer understanding of what it would be for X and Y to be formally distinct. And I'm glad you asked that question. X and Y are formally distinct if and only if X and Y are really the same, right? One thing out there. But X has a different ratio, reason, you might think account. X has a different account than does Y. But neither the account of X and Y overlaps each other. Whoa. You're saying, well, I don't know if there are such things. Well, a lot of other people thought that Scotus was talking here about something that was just too subtle to actually exist or obtain. Formal distinction is a subtle distinction. I'll give you a Scotus quote on the formal distinction, and then we'll come back and talk about it more. Scotus says, and I won't quote it in Latin, so that's good. The individual entity is not matter or form of the composite, inasmuch as each of these is a nature. Rather, it is the ultimate reality of the being that is matter, or that is form, or that is composite. Thus, whatever is common and yet determinable can still be distinguished, no matter how much it is one thing, into several formally distinct realities, of which this one is not formally that one. This one is formally the entity of singularity, and that one is formally the entity of the nature. These two realities cannot be distinguished as thing and thing. Rather, when in the same thing, whether in a part or in the whole, they are always formally distinct realities of the same thing. At this point, this is Dr. Dennis Bielfeldt of Christ School of Theology. I'll be right back with you after I drink some water. Thank you.